The voice, shredded by static, screamed of silicon scales and teeth from another time, a madman's final testament. I listened. The flickering audio readout, illuminating my weary face. Another ghost whispering impossible horrors from the void. The universe thrummed with a familiar bone-deep chill, mirroring the emptiness in my gut. Our vessel, the Stalker, a sleek predator cloaked in shadow, cut through the black light years from any sun that mattered. Captain Eva Rostova, all crisp uniform and sharper edges, leaned over the main console, her voice devoid of warmth. "Ares Prime Research Station 7, she stated, a holographic schematic glowing ominously. Dark for weeks, no response. Classified recovery and assessment. Just another dead world. Another corporate secret. Another suicide mission." The mess hall smelled of recycled air and synthetic coffee, a poor substitute for real life. Dr. Eris Thorne, our resident xenobiologist, gestured wildly, his eyes alight with academic fervor. "Imagine the possibilities, Kael. An entire archive of prehistoric biospecimens, untouched." He was a walking contradiction, brilliant and utterly naive to the abyss we routinely stared into. Across from him, specialist Lena Petrova meticulously cleaned her pulse rifle, the rhythmic click of components a grim counterpoint to Thorne's excited chatter. Her gaze, sharp and observant, missed nothing. She was the quiet type, like me, recognizing the gallows humor in our situation. We were all just waiting for the next nightmare, our cynicism a shield against the inevitable. Ares Prime hung in the viewport, a colossal tomb against the star-dusted black. It was monolithic, silent, a testament to corporate ambition and, now, profound failure. No energy signatures, no comms, no lifeboats launched. Captain Rostova's voice cut through the observation deck's quiet, clinically detailing the obvious. Her words were crisp, professional, but even she couldn't sterilize the unease that clung to the air like recycled dust. A familiar prickle crawled up my spine, a whisper from the void that this wasn't just a dead station. It was holding its breath. The Stalker's command center was cramped, a crucible of dim lights and holographic displays. Ares Prime schematics shimmered, sterile lines hiding what I knew was a festering wound. "A genetic archive," Thorne explained, his voice a tremor of intellectual excitement, pointing at a theoretical section. "For prehistoric biospecimens. Imagine, Kael, resurrecting Earth's apex predators." Rostova cut in, a sharp edge to her tone. "Mission parameters are black-boxed, Doctor. Corporate classified. We go in, we retrieve data, we verify. Nothing more." I watched the schematics, the glowing lines of an ancient, impossible zoo. Corporations always had a way of turning the most dangerous things into a profit margin, and my gut twisted with a cynical certainty. This wasn't about preservation. It was about power, and a horror waiting to be unleashed. The airlock hissed, thick with the smell of ozone and fear. The ritual of suiting up was a familiar comfort. The weight of the blaster in my hands a cold, honest friend. I checked my seals, catching Petrova's eye across the cramped space. She gave a silent nod, her expression a mirror of my own grim resolve. Thorne, bless his academic heart, fumbled with his helmet, a jarring note of vulnerability in our hardened ranks. Rostova's voice, sharp and final, cut through the metallic clang of gear. "Final check. Maintain formation. Remember your training." The airlock door began its slow, grinding descent. The void yawned beyond, and we were walking into its hungry maw. Another expedition into the unknown, another roll of the cosmic dice. The maintenance airlock hissed a final, mournful sigh as Petrova's hands, impossibly swift and precise, disengaged the last security clamp. A low thunk echoed through the void. Then the inner hatch slid open with a groan that seemed to swallow all sound. Darkness. Absolute, suffocating darkness, broken only by the narrow beams of our helmet-mounted lights. We stepped into Ares Prime, boots crunching on what felt like years of accumulated dust. The air, thick and stale, tasted of forgotten machinery and something else. Something chemical, acrid. No hum of life support, no distant flicker of emergency power, just silence. A profound, unsettling stillness that felt heavier than the vacuum outside. It wasn't merely dead. It felt stayed dead, as if the station itself had taken its last breath and refused to exhale. My skin prickled. A dead world indeed. Further inside, the cold silence persisted, though now punctuated by the soft scuff of our boots. We found the crew quarters first. Not a power failure, not a simple abandonment. This was a ransacking. Furniture overturned, personal effects scattered like discarded memories, lockers ripped open. It spoke of panic, of a desperate flight. Thorn, ever the academic, knelt beside a desktop terminal, its screen flickering with residual power. "Fascinating," he murmured, his voice tight with an excitement I found deeply unsettling. Corrupted logs, but traces. Mentions of uncontrolled growth, unexpected biomass expansion. Rostova's face, illuminated by her helmet light, was grim. "No sign of struggle, no blood," she observed, ever pragmatic. But I saw the truth etched in the chaos. This wasn't a simple power outage. This was a frantic, terrified escape from something that left no bodies, only echoes of fear. The madman's ramblings from Survivor Zero felt less mad with every step. The corridor narrowed, leading deeper into the station's spine. Our lights danced over peeling paint and corroded conduits, until Petrova suddenly halted, her hand raised. "Captain," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Look." A section of the corridor wall, spanning nearly 10 meters, was wrong. It looked less like metal and more like melted plastic, scorched and warped, as if an immense, unseen heat source had dragged itself across the surface. Streaks of an oily, iridescent sheen coated the distorted metal. Thorn was instantly beside it, his scanner whirring. "Impossible," he breathed, his voice a mix of awe and terror. "Silicon traces. And biological residue. Highly complex molecular structures, integrated with the metallics." My gut clenched. Silicon scales. Teeth from another time. Survivor Zero's rant. It wasn't a madman's delirium. It was a witness's testimony. We weren't just investigating a dead station. We were descending into a tomb that was far from empty. The air grew thick, humid, clinging to my suit like a wet shroud. Our flashlights, once piercing the sterile gloom, now struggled against a riot of bioluminescent growths. Corridors that should have been stark metal tunnels were choked with alien flora, pulsing with an inner light. Greens, blues, and sickly purples. It was beautiful, in a grotesque, cancerous way, a living labyrinth devouring the station's cold architecture. Thorn, ever the academic, was practically vibrating. "Unbelievable," he whispered, his voice hushed with awe over the comms. "Unknown biological markers, Captain. Not of Earth. This isn't just growth, it's an entirely new biome." Rostova's voice was a sharp counterpoint. "Keep moving, Doctor. Beautiful or not, it's still trying to eat the station." I agreed with her, though my thoughts drifted to how easily beauty could mask something insidious. This wasn't life. It was an infection. The glowing path finally opened into a cavernous chamber, immense, cathedral-like. It stole the breath from my lungs, though I knew it was the site, not the recycled air. Rows upon rows of towering stasis tanks lined the walls, stretching into the unseen ceiling. Inside, perfectly preserved, were the things of nightmares and legends. Dinosaurs. Ancient Earth predators frozen in a timeless slumber, their forms incredibly detailed, their skin and scales catching the faint glow of the chamber's machinery. Thorn let out a choked sound, a mix of reverence and utter terror. Tyrannosaurus, velociraptors, a triceratops. My God, they brought them all back. His voice was barely a whisper as he rattled off species names, a morbid roll call of apex predators. It was a profound wrongness, a tampering with the natural order that chafed at my cynical soul. Who plays God with extinction-level events? And why? My gaze, drawn by some primal instinct, fixed on a particularly large tank near Thorn, Within, the formidable silhouette of a theropod, a beast of nightmare, and then a flicker, a subtle twitch in what I assumed was its closed eye. My blood ran cold. Thorn, oblivious at first, was still muttering about biometrics. Then his scanner began to shriek, a frantic, high-pitched whine. Anomalous readings, energy fluctuations inside the specimen, and silicon. Traces of silicon within the biological structure. His voice was rising, laced with dawning horror. Silicon scales. Survivor Zero's rant echoed in my mind, no longer the ravings of a madman but a terrifying prophecy. This wasn't just preserved life, it was something changed. Something re-engineered. The horror was awakening, and we were standing in its nursery. A spiderweb crack spread across the stasis tank, just above the theropod's head. A low groan rumbled through the chamber, followed by a sharp, deafening crack. The tank exploded inwards, showering us with coolant and shards of supercooled glass. A shriek, ancient and yet utterly alien, tore through the silence. The creature burst forth, its skin a metallic sheen, like polished obsidian. It moved with impossible speed, a blur of muscle and silicon-armored plating. "Take cover! Take cover!" I roared, my voice raw as I dove behind a discarded console. The creature, a nightmare made flesh, slammed into a nearby tank, shattering it with ease. The sound of tearing metal and glass mingled with its guttural roars. We weren't prepared for this. Not for this. Earth's deadliest predators, reborn and weaponized, were now hunting in the dark halls of Ares Prime. The main archive chamber was a charnel house. Stasis fluid mixed with shattered glass and the acrid stench of ozone. The creature, a bipedal nightmare with the skeletal grace of a raptor but sheathed in gleaming obsidian-like silicon, moved with impossible speed. Our blaster fire, usually enough to punch through light armor, sparked harmlessly off its scales. "Concentrate fire! Aim for the joints!" Rostova, her voice tight with professional urgency. My own blaster felt like a child's toy. Lena, a ghost in her own right, was already a blur, attempting a flanking maneuver, her combat knife a desperate glint against the creature's armored hide. It roared, a sound like grinding stone, and swiped at Lena, who rolled under its attack with a grace that spoke of 1,000 simulations. This wasn't a simple salvage mission, wasn't even a standard Black Ops extraction. This was a nightmare-given silicon skin, and every mission parameter we had was utterly, terrifyingly useless. We scrambled into a maintenance alcove, barely sealing the heavy door before the creature slammed against it, making the entire structure shudder. Thorn was huddled in the corner, his face pale, hands shaking. His scientific awe had curdled into pure, unadulterated horror. They're not supposed to be like this," he whispered, his voice thin, almost childlike. The silicon was for structural integrity, for preservation, not augmentation. I gripped his arm hard. "Snap out of it, Doc. Your specimens are trying to eat us. You're the one who knows how they work." His eyes, wide with terror, met mine. "It's a perversion, Kael. A desecration. We played God, and this is the price." The guilt in his voice was a raw, open wound, but the thudding outside the door reminded us that introspection was a luxury we couldn't afford. Think Thorn. Anything. Any weakness. The genetic sequences, the silicon integration. There has to be a flaw. My voice was a low growl, urgency cutting through his despair. He gasped, forcing himself to focus, scrubbing a hand over his tear-streaked face. The silicon, it's bonded at a molecular level, but it's still an additive. It requires a catalyst, a constant energy flow to maintain its plasticity and strength. If we could disrupt that bond, overload it, or perhaps target the original biological nucleus, the brainstem, where the silicon integration is weakest, a point of rapid cellular growth. He was sketching frantically on his compad, arcane biological diagrams appearing and disappearing. My mind raced, connecting the dots. It was a long shot, a desperate gamble, but it was a chance, a flicker of hope, cold and hard as the silicon itself ignited in the pit of my gut. "All right, Doc, you gave us something. Now we need a plan to use it. Thorn's information, however theoretical, was our only compass. We snaked through the service tunnels, Lena leading the way, a whisper-like shadow in the gloom. The air was thick with the faint, metallic scent of the creatures, a smell that now clung to my nightmares. Every creak of the station, every distant groan of metal, sent a jolt of ice through my veins. "Movement," Lena whispered, her voice barely audible over the thrum of ancient pipes. I peered through a grate. In the distant, shimmering darkness of a ventilation shaft, a crimson eye gleamed, then vanished. It wasn't just hearing. These things had enhanced senses, a predatory intelligence adapting to our every move. They were learning. We were trapped in their labyrinth, a desperate game of cat and mouse, and I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that the mouse always ran out of cheese. The tunnel ahead was a dead end. The air suddenly tasted of ozone and fear. We were navigating a junction, a spiderweb of narrow service corridors, when the attack came. Not a single, lumbering beast, but three, bursting from shadowed vents simultaneously. One lunged for Petrova from above, its silicon-plated claws raking the ceiling, showering sparks. Another slammed into the bulkhead beside Rostova, its heavy reptilian head snapping. I saw the third, a blur of scaled muscle, coming straight for me. "Ambush! Engage!" Rostova's voice, usually so crisp, was strained, her blaster already spitting bolts. My own weapon whined, the energy blasts deflecting off the lead creature's reinforced hide. These weren't just animals, they were intelligent hunters, coordinating their assault. They were learning. We were being outsmarted. "Fall back! To the access shaft!" Rostova yelled, her fire covering Petrova's retreat. The creatures pressed in, a wall of gleaming silicon and primal fury. Thorn, still reeling from the chaos, fumbled with his compad, trying to reroute power to a bulkhead door. A creature, its crimson eyes burning, closed in on him. "Thorn, move!" I screamed, but it was too late. He raised a small energy pistol, a scientific tool more than a weapon, and fired. It barely singed the beast's armor. Then, a shriek, desperate and gurgling, as the creature's jaws clamped down. The crack of bone was sickeningly loud even through my helmet. "No!" Petrova cried, but Rostova grabbed her, pulling her back. "We go now! Elias!" My gut twisted. Save the team or risk everything for a lost cause. The choice was brutal, but simple. "Retreat! Leave him!" The words tasted like ash. We scrambled, leaving Thorn and the silence of his sacrifice behind. We holed up in a sealed medical bay, the air thick with the smell of scorched metal and our own fear. Petrova, silent as ever, patched a blaster graze on my arm. Rostova ran diagnostics on her compad, her face grim. Hull integrity compromised, auxiliary power flickering, supplies dwindling. She didn't need to mention Thorn. His absence was a gaping wound. I stared at my reflection in the polished medbay floor, a stranger with haunted eyes. We had come for answers, for profit, for survival. Now it was something else. A cold, hard resolve settled in my chest. This wasn't just about getting out alive anymore. This was about vengeance. Rostova's fingers flew across a secure data core console, bypassing firewalls with practiced ease. Fragmented logs flickered onto the screen. "Here it is," she muttered, her voice tight. "Project Chimera, silicon symbiosis, biomechanical augmentation. They weren't just reviving prehistoric life. They were enhancing it." My blood ran cold. The logs hinted at a central processor, a consciousness, guiding the evolution. This wasn't a biological outbreak, a simple escape from stasis. This was a controlled, horrifying experiment. The madman wasn't mad. He was just ahead of the curve, screaming into the void about a new god being born. Our next objective became terrifyingly clear. Find this central processor and kill it. The main access shaft was a maw of bioluminescent terror. What had once been sterile metal corridors now pulsed with an obscene, silicon-rich organic growth, clinging to pipes and conduits like a hungry fungus. Strange, shifting lights, not from any human source, painted the walls in sickly greens and purples. Water, black and viscous, pooled around our boots, reflecting the eerie glow. "Keep your eyes peeled." Rostova's voice, tight with caution, cut through my comms. "Readings are spiking." She didn't need to tell me. I felt it, a prickling on my skin, far more intense than any static charge. It was the presence of something ancient, something alive, and growing stronger with every meter we descended. A shadow, too fast and too heavily armored for any creature we'd encountered so far, flickered at the edge of my vision, then vanished into the pulsing gloom. This station wasn't just infected, it was being consumed, transformed into a living, breathing nightmare. The shaft opened into a chamber that defied logic, a grotesque cathedral of biomechanical blasphemy. At its heart, the unstable god pulsed. It was a fusion of colossal organic mass and gleaming, dark silicon, constantly shifting, growing, reconfiguring itself. Tendrils, thick as my torso, snaked from its core, disappearing into the walls, presumably to feed its monstrous creations. It thrummed with raw energy, a sound that vibrated in my teeth. "By the void," Rostova whispered, her voice laced with a horror I rarely heard from her. "It's the central processor. It's self-aware, malevolent." My stomach churned. This wasn't just a machine gone rogue or some biological outbreak. This was a consciousness, a grotesque fusion of primeval biology and advanced tech, not just creating predators, but becoming one. It was a monument to humanity's hubris, a new god born of genetic archives and silicon dreams, and it was watching us. The god reacted to our presence with a shudder that echoed through the chamber. Its pulsating core intensified, and then the creatures came. Not the same lumbering beasts from the archive, but something new. Faster, deadlier. A pack of raptor-like forms, their silicon scales shimmering with an internal energy, moved with impossible coordination. One deployed a shimmering energy shield, deflecting Petrova's precise blaster bolt. Another flickered, briefly cloaking itself before reappearing closer than I thought possible. "Impossible!" Rostova muttered, unleashing a volley of plasma that merely scorched the armor of a charging behemoth. "They're evolving in real time." Elias knew we couldn't fight them all. The sheer numbers, the impossible adaptations. Our blasters were barely scratching them. "Forget them!" I yelled over the cacophony of roars and blaster fire. "Focus fire on the core! That's the target!" We fell back, dodging claws and snapping jaws, finding a momentary reprieve behind a fallen section of machinery. "There!" Rostova shouted, pointing a gloved finger at a holographic schematic flickering on her wrist-mounted compad. An energy conduit, critical structural integrity point for the core. But it's heavily shielded, and those things are converging on it. I squinted through the gloom. The conduit was a pulsating artery, leading directly into the god's heart. But 3 of the largest, most heavily armored creatures were already circling it. "All right," I grunted, a grim plan forming in my mind. "We need a diversion, a big one. Petrova, you're our ghost. When I draw them off, you get in there and plant the charges." She nodded, her face a mask of resolute calm, already checking her satchel for the explosives. It was a suicidal play, a desperate gamble. But out here, on the edge of the void, that was often the only way to win. The central chamber was a swirling maelstrom of silicon-armored nightmares, their crimson eyes fixed on the pulsating heart of the god. Our plan was simple, suicidal, and our only chance. "Go, Lena! Now!" I yelled into the comms, my voice raw as I slammed a pre-primed sonic grenade against a structural pillar. The resulting concussive blast echoed, deafening, momentarily disorienting the nearest theropod, sending a shower of sparks from its obsidian-hard scales. It swiveled, its head a blur of teeth and silicon, its roar a physical blow. "Kael, watch your 6!" Rostova's voice, tight with strain, crackled in my ear as blaster fire lanced over my head, striking a raptor-like creature that had been flanking me. The bolt merely staggered it, its silicon plating shrugging off the energy. These things were relentless, built for one purpose: to kill. My own blaster felt like a child's toy against them. I sprinted, weaving between exploding stasis tanks and convulsing organic tendrils, laying down suppressive fire, drawing their attention like a blood-soaked lure. Every instinct screamed for me to conserve ammo, but this wasn't about winning, it was about buying seconds. Seconds for Lena. I glanced back, seeing the blur of her tactical suit, a phantom amidst the chaos, slipping towards the gods' vulnerable conduits. Hope, a dangerous thing, flickered. Lena Petrova moved like a whisper in a hurricane. While Elias drew the snarling, silicon-plated nightmares to himself, Lena was already there, a ghost in the gods' shadow. Her breathing was shallow, controlled, a rhythmic counterpoint to the distant cacophony of blaster fire and bestial roars. Her fingers, nimble and precise, worked at the exposed energy conduit, a thick, pulsating artery of biosilicon that hummed with sickening power. The conduit was guarded, not by creatures, but by a network of shimmering energy fields, a last-ditch defense. With a flick of her wrist, a small, multi-frequency emitter was affixed, bypassing the field with a barely audible ton pop. She produced a trio of shaped charges, compact and deadly, their magnetic clamps snapping into place around the conduit's weakest point. The god pulsed, oblivious, its grotesque form still feeding the chaos. A bead of sweat traced a path down her temple, but her eyes remained steady, focused. She armed the detonator, a soft click confirming the activation. One last glance at the pulsing conduit, a silent acknowledgement of the destruction she was about to unleash. Then she melted back into the shadows, a specter of vengeance. The detonation was less a bang and more a guttural thump that vibrated through the very bones of the station, followed by a searing flash that momentarily blinded us. The central chamber, already a vision of hell, convulsed. The unstable god, at its heart, let out a shriek that wasn't sound, but pure agony, a psychic scream that rattled my teeth and made my vision swim. It wasn't just metal rending, but something far older, far more primal, tearing itself apart. Tendrils, thick as my torso, whipped wildly, tearing chunks of its own organic mechanical body free. The bioluminescent growths that coated the chamber flickered violently, then erupted in sprays of incandescent plasma. The silicon predators, moments ago a coordinated, deadly force, now reeled. Some shrieked, clawing at their own armored faces, while others turned on each other, a frenzied, mindless slaughter. The floor buckled beneath my boots. "It's falling apart!" Rostova screamed, her voice barely audible over the gods' death throes. "Kael, Petrova, move! Get out!" The very air tasted of ozone and burning flesh, the stench of its dying, a memory I knew would haunt me forever. The station groaned, a dying beast collapsing around us. Massive structural beams groaned and buckled, showering the chamber in sparks and molten metal. I scrambled over a section of fallen walkway, my breath rasping in my lungs, the acrid smell of burning biosilicon stinging my nostrils. A massive wall panel peeled away like paper, revealing the cold vacuum of space beyond, sucking debris into the void. "Kael, to your left!" Rostova's voice was a desperate lifeline. I barely registered her warning before a wave of superheated steam erupted from a ruptured pipe, forcing me to dive, abandoning my heavy blaster rifle in the process. I hit the deck hard, rolling, my eyes scanning for any sign of Lena or Rostova. The creatures, disoriented but still deadly, were everywhere, their roars now laced with confusion and pain. One, a bipedal hunter with razor talons, stumbled, its silicon armor cracked, but it still lunged, its maw snapping inches from my face. I kicked out, sending it sprawling into a chasm of sparking wires. There was no strategy now, only instinct. Survive, move, find an exit. The station wasn't just dying, it was actively trying to kill us, the gods' final, chaotic act of defiance. Every step was a gamble against falling debris and the lingering, desperate hunger of its creations. We regrouped in a section of corridor that, by some miracle, remained largely intact, though the floor still shuddered with distant tremors. Rostova leaned against a blast door, her face streaked with grime, a nasty gash bleeding freely above her brow. Lena was already patching a tear in her suit, her movements economical, her expression unreadable as always. I ran a hand through my sweat-soaked hair, the adrenaline draining, leaving behind a bone-deep weariness. My arm throbbed where a piece of shrapnel had grazed it. "Status report," I grunted, my voice hoarse. Rostova just shook her head. "Ares Prime is gone. Completely. Structural integrity at 0. Retrieval is impossible." I already knew. The echoes of the gods' death shriek still vibrated in my skull. Thorn was gone. Too many others. We'd come out here for answers, for a Black Ops cleanup, and all we'd found was a hellscape of corporate hubris and ancient horrors. We'd shut it down, yes, but at what cost? The victory felt hollow, a grim joke played by a universe that cared little for human lives or ideals. We were alive, but the price of that survival felt heavier than any gold. The station was tearing itself apart, a monument to corporate hubris collapsing in on itself. Every groan of stressed metal, every shower of sparks from severed conduits, was a fresh reminder of Ares Prime's death throes. Rostova, a phantom in the gloom, led the way, her tactical light dancing over structural fractures that spiderwebbed across corridors. "Watch your step, Kael," she grunted, her voice tight with strain, floors buckling. I gritted my teeth, vaulting over a chasm that had opened, where a moment ago there was solid deck plating. Debris rained down, chunks of ceramic and twisted wiring. A shadow detached itself from the chaos ahead, a smaller, leaner form of the silicon-scaled horrors. It was disoriented, its crimson eye flickering erratically, but its instincts were still sharp. It lunged, a desperate, guttural snarl ripping through the din. "Petrova, on me!" I yelled, raising my pulse rifle. The creature, a juvenile raptor-like beast, was fast, but the damage to its internal systems made its movements jagged, predictable. My first bolt seared a hole in its side. Another clipped its leg. It shrieked, a sound more of pain than rage, and crumpled. "Clear!" Petrova's voice, calm as ever, cut through the comms. We pushed on, the hum of our escape pod growing louder, a siren song of desperate hope. The Stalker's airlock was a beacon. We scrambled inside, a tangle of limbs and gear, the hiss of the outer hatch sealing behind us the sweetest sound I'd ever heard. I slumped against the cold metal bulkhead, my lungs burning, the acrid scent of burnt silicon and ionized air clinging to my suit. The ship's automated systems chirped, a detached voice confirming, Ares Prime Research Station 7, catastrophic structural failure confirmed. All primary systems offline. Extinction event probable. Extinction event. A clinical phrase for a cosmic nightmare. A wave of bone-deep relief washed over me. A brief, dizzying high, quickly followed by the heavy, crushing weight of what we'd witnessed. We'd survived. But the images, the screams, Thorn's final moments, they were etched into my mind, fresh and raw. The nightmare wasn't over. It had just changed address. The Stalker pulled away, engines groaning, as Ares Prime shuddered through its final, agonizing moments. On the main view screen, the colossal station, once a symbol of corporate ambition, twisted and fragmented, a dying star breaking apart into a million glittering pieces. Rostova's voice, usually crisp, was subdued. "Station's gone. All known biological signatures dissipated with the atmospheric breach." She sounded certain, but I wasn't. The void was a vast, cold canvas, and horror had a way of finding its way into every crevice. I stared at the expanding cloud of debris, a silent, terrible funeral pyre, all known signatures. But what about the unknown? What about a single spore? A microscopic fragment of silicon-infused DNA? A seed of that god-awful evolution, clinging to a stray piece of wreckage? My gut clenched. You never truly contained a nightmare. You just kicked it down the road. The Stalker's medbay, usually a pristine, sterile space, felt like a morgue. The hum of the ship was the only sound, a backdrop to our quiet, grim work. Rostova methodically cleaned a blaster burn on her arm, her movements precise. Petrova, ever silent, stitched a gash on her own leg with surprising dexterity. We were all patched up, but the wounds ran deeper than any medkit could reach. Command won't like this, Rostova murmured, breaking the silence. Eris Prime was classified. They'll bury it. Call it a rogue experiment, a containment breach. Something to sweep under the rug. I nodded, my eyes fixed on the flickering bio-readout of my own minor lacerations. They always do. The grim reality hung in the recycled air. We were survivors, yes, but we were also witnesses. And what we'd witnessed, that was something Command wouldn't just disbelieve. They'd make sure no one else did either. It was a secret, too dangerous to keep, and too dangerous to tell. Deep in hyperspace, the Stalker's command center was a bubble of uneasy calm. Elias, Rostova, and Petrova stood before the main console, the swirling colors of warp speed reflecting in their weary faces. So, the report, I began, the words tasting like ash. We file it, they bury it. Best case, we're debriefed, then reassigned to a milk run in some backwater system. Worst case, well, Thorn wasn't the first accident to happen to a Black Ops team, was he? Rostova crossed her arms, her gaze fixed on the warp stream. There are other channels, independent networks, brokers who deal in information too hot for corporate eyes. My cynicism flared. And we become targets for every faction in the quadrant? Trading one set of silicon teeth for another? Petrova, who had been silent for hours, her expression unreadable, finally spoke. Her voice was low, steady, a surprising anchor in the room. We tell the truth, all of it. Let them bury it if they want. But someone needs to know what they created. What we fought. I stared at her, a flicker of something almost like admiration cutting through my weariness. She was right. But the cost. The vastness of hyperspace seemed to press in on us. A silent judge. Report the truth and be silenced, or expose it and become targets. There was only one choice that felt right, even if it meant stepping into another kind of dark. The void, usually a balm for my weary soul, felt different this time. It reflected the grime of this desolate station, a jagged scar on the black canvas of space, known only as the Pit. Our sleek, battle-scarred Stalker docked amidst a hive of metal and neon, clinging to forgotten asteroids like parasitic fungi. Every shadow seemed to hold a pair of eyes, not the hungry, unthinking eyes of a silicon beast, but the calculating, human kind. The airlock hissed open, exhaling recycled air that smelled of synth booze and stale ambition. Rostova, her face a mask of grim resolve, tapped a data slate. Reviewing the package one last time, Kael. This is it, our grim testament. I just nodded, the weight of the data, the horrors it contained, pressing down on me. We were walking into a predator's den, but at least these predators had a price. The Oracle's chamber was an unsettling blend of opulence and alien mystique. Exotic artifacts, glowing with strange internal lights, lined the walls, casting a kaleidoscopic sheen on the rich fabrics. A figure, obscured by shimmering holographic projections, sat at the head of a polished obsidian table. Its voice, a synthesized rasp, echoed around us, devoid of warmth or recognizable gender. You come bearing intriguing wares, Captain Kael. Details of a corporate bioweapon incident that the official channels have already, shall we say, come managed. Elias, feeling the familiar prickle of being tested, pushed the data slate forward. More than an incident, Oracle. A genetic archive, self-aware, birthing silicon-armored abominations. A new god, if you will, created by corporate hubris. The Oracle's projections shifted, a faint hum of intrigue emanating from its hidden form. Intriguing indeed, but such claims require substantial verification. The negotiations were a dance with a veiled devil. The Oracle probed, questioned, its synthesized voice testing the veracity of every horrifying detail. But the data, raw and unredacted, spoke for itself. The screams of Thorn, the visual logs of the silicon beasts, the schematics of the unstable god. It was all there. Finally, a hum of satisfaction. The terms are agreeable. Your vessel will receive a complete refit, military-grade shielding, enhanced weaponry, and enough credits to see your crew comfortable for a lifetime. The transfer notification flashed on my compad. A fortune. Blood money, I thought, the bitterness a familiar taste. We'd traded our ideals for survival, our truth for a gilded cage. Rostova double-checked the contracts, her gaze sharp, ensuring no hidden clauses. Petrova stood silently, her expression unreadable, watching the transaction as if it were a scientific experiment. We had sold a world. Years later, the Stalker was barely recognizable. No longer a battered Black Ops vessel, she gleamed, a formidable warship, equipped with corporate-funded upgrades. Military-grade shielding, weaponry that could make a cruiser blush. We had it all. Our crew quarters weren't cramped bunks anymore, but reasonably spacious cabins. We even had a damn mess hall that served actual food, instead of the usual rehydrated rations. Yet, beneath the sheen of wealth and comfort, an undercurrent of unease lingered. The nightmares still came. The winged creatures shrieked through my sleep, Thorn's final cry an echo in the silence. Brooks' chronic limp was a constant reminder of the price we'd paid. I watched Rostova, her face still etched with the grim lines of command, and Petrova, her eyes holding that same unyielding, haunted stare. We were rich, safe even, but we were also forever scarred, living in a gilded cage of our own making. It was on one of those sleepless nights that I found myself in the mess hall, a news report flickering across the main screen. A generic anchor, all smiles and corporate spin, announced the, quote, successful containment of a rogue bioweapon at a distant research station, Eris Prime. They called it a, quote, minor incident, followed by the strategic acquisition of advanced biomechanical research by leading corporate entities. My stomach twisted. Rostova met my gaze across the room, her eyes grim. We knew the full, twisted truth. They'd swept it under the rug, packaged the horror, and were now doubtless trying to weaponize the very thing that had torn our world apart. Grim satisfaction mingled with a profound disgust. We had survived, exposed the truth to someone, and the world had dealt with it in the most corporate way possible, by burying the bodies and selling the patents. The main screen on the Stalker's bridge flared to life, replacing the endless starfield with a crisp data readout. A new contract. Rostova's voice, calm and professional as ever, cut through the hum of the ship. Deep Space Survey. Uncharted System. Sector GAMMA-7. Looks like quiet work. My gut twisted. Quiet. That was a word I'd grown to distrust, a siren song for the unsuspecting. I felt the familiar pull of the void, a grim acceptance of the cyclical nature of our lives. We'd traded one hell for another, a gilded cage for a universe that still demanded its pound of flesh. Across the bridge, Petrova moved towards the armory, her movements fluid and efficient. She didn't need a briefing. She was always ready for the next unknown, her silence a constant anchor in our storm-tossed existence. Sleep was a stranger I rarely welcomed. The cabin, now spacious and comfortable, felt more like a tomb. Nightmares still came, unbidden and brutal. The shriek of the unstable god, the glint of silicon scales in the dark, Thorn's final, desperate cry. I ran a thumb over the worn plastic of an old scanner, a small, scientific tool I'd salvaged from Thorn's personal effects. A memento. It felt heavy, a physical manifestation of the permanent scars Ares Prime had etched onto my soul. We had survived, yes, but at what cost? The horror had been contained, buried under corporate lies and military might. Yet it lived on, in the quiet corners of my mind, a malignant seed that refused to die. The universe was vast, but some evils, once seen, shrank it down to a single terrifying point. I found Rostova on the observation deck, watching a new nebula unfurl its silent, shimmering beauty across the void. It was a peaceful sight, a stark contrast to the chaos that usually defined our existence. We stood in comfortable silence, two weary souls bound by shared trauma and moral compromise. "Quiet work," she finally murmured, her voice soft, almost wistful. Wouldn't that be something? There was a quiet hope in her tone, a fragile thing I hadn't heard in years. I knew it was a lie we told ourselves, a necessary one. "There's no such thing, Eva," I replied, my voice rougher than intended. "Not anymore." She simply nodded, her gaze fixed on the nebula, a mirror of her own quiet resilience. We were both broken, both forged anew in the fires of Ares Prime, and in that shared burden, there was a strange, undeniable connection. The Stalker's armory was a sanctuary of cold steel and oiled mechanisms. Petrova was there, as always, meticulously cleaning her weapons. Her movements were precise, almost ritualistic, each component handled with a reverence I understood. She wasn't just cleaning them. She was preparing for the inevitable, for the next time the universe decided to show its teeth. I leaned against the doorway, watching her, a ghost in the periphery. Her focus was absolute, a silent strength that had held us together when everything else threatened to unravel. She looked up, her gaze steady, unwavering. No words were exchanged, none were needed. Just a knowing stare, a shared understanding of the darkness we carried, and the quiet resolve to face it again. She was our anchor, always ready, always watching. The bridge lights dimmed, a kaleidoscope of swirling blues and purples consuming the viewport as the Stalker plunged into hyperspace. Another jump. Another uncharted system. The universe, vast and indifferent, stretched before us, an endless tapestry of mysteries and dangers. We were small, insignificant specks, yet we carried the weight of a secret that could shatter empires. Ares Prime, the Silicon Beasts, the unstable god. It was all behind us, a ghost in the machine. But the prospector's spirit, that stubborn, foolish hope for real gold, still lived within me. Not credits, not fame, but the untainted truth, a glimpse of something pure in a galaxy twisted by corporate greed and cosmic horror. We were gamblers, after all, forever chasing that elusive promise, even if it led us to another corner of the void where new nightmares waited.